on. This is the Parallactic Leap, Fichte, Apperception, and the Hard Problem of Consciousness by G. Anthony Bruno. And this was in, it looks like, a book from 2021. Yeah. So. And as always, still be able to game and hang out. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I legitimately want at least 20 more 32-inch OLED so I can have at least one more episode of Star Trek playing at all times. That's nuts cost, but okay. Yeah. Benny says, I'm an academic analytic philosopher, so quite familiar with Phil papers. Oh, okay, yeah. I figured. But, like, again, it's just like, why is this uploaded the way it is? Because it's got, like, this is what they have. And, like, oh, it's great. So now I've got, like, little annotations here. Things. But, yeah. So, Luminance says, whoa, Fichte, let's go. Hey, Luminance, what's up? Oh, I should be giving shout-outs. I keep forgetting to do these things. Bad streamer. Near stuff moves differently than far stuff. Yeah, Dojo. So it gets used in ways of like, different perspectives and how you have different views on stuff. We'll see. What is the hard problem of consciousness? The experience you have is not reducible to anything in science because experience is not a scientific thing. And that's really the hard problem of consciousness. How do you explain the experience we have of living as opposed to anything in science, which is not an experience? Thank you for the shout out to Luminance. So that's the really short version, Fidel. Yeah, so yeah. Why are things the way they are? I don't know, Benny. This is life. It's why things are the way they are. Yeah, so as always, feel free to ask questions. I will do my best to answer them. This is my first time reading it, and I am not an expert in this area, but, chat quite often knows stuff. All that matters is hard. Yeah, like we were just saying, many things on you are not hard, and then they are hard later, and that's what matters about them. So, here we go. In The Phenomenon of Life, Hans Jonas defines a problem as a collision between a comprehensive view and a particular fact which will not fit into it. Part of Jonas' concern is how death and life pose problems for views that explain the world as vital and mechanical, respectively. All right, I'm going to put the volume down a little bit because it's in my head. Yeah. While vitalist and mechanist views face the easy problem of accommodating facts.
That AI is only missing two things to make it more alive: a need to replicate and a need to survive.
But that need is a very different thing than anything we've programmed in before. We can program in all that stuff, but what is it actually to have a need? And like, it may just be begging the entire question, the idea that it would need to survive. Because if it's not the same sort of thing that programming it in is, then, that's the whole game. Define need, yeah. As Viper says. So, I mean, that might be, like, it's maybe easier said than done. Okay. While vitalist and mechanist views face the easy problem of accommodating facts amenable to their explanatory methods, they face the hard problem of facts that resist these methods. Thus, vitalism collides with the fact that life expires for no apparent purpose, and mechanism collides with the fact that death elicits outrage and hope. I have no idea why you'd say such things like this, but, they do. Okay. A more recently formulated hard problem confronts physicalism. In facing up to the problem of consciousness, David Chalmers argues that physicalism cannot show why scientifically explicable phenomena like perception and action are accompanied by experience, by the fact that there is something that it is like to perceive and act, a fact that Chalmers attributes to subjectivity. This fact is absurd insofar as it is neither amenable to the... There we go. Like, it was looking weird to me for some reason. This fact is absurd insofar as it is neither amenable to the explanatory methods of science nor entailed by phenomena so amenable. And this is what I was just saying, because, we were discussing this. That it looks like experience is something different than what we're explaining in science. And so that is, since it's a different class of thing, it seems to be a problem. A lot of people don't buy that experience actually is something different. So they're just like, well, you're making shit up. But that's one position. The other position is that it's not just something we're making up. Okay. Absent a supplementary principle of explanation, the rich inner life or phenomenal character of experience is objectively unreasonable for physicalism, which must behold this first personal fact across an explanatory gap. Yeah, and so if you're a physicalist, you're like, well, there is no experience. It's just, your brain making shit up, which the entire world is anyway. So, whatever. Chalmers is a dualist. Yeah. So, Unreal says, coincidentally, last week I got a book by G.H. Mead, an introduction to the work of G.H. Mead. Cool. I don't know who that is. Did they just get referenced here? I don't know this stuff. I'm sorry, Brian. Yeah. Don't think so. He's a proponent of IIT. All right. Okay, we've got people arguing about what Chalmers is. We will find out what this author says. A precursor to the hard problem of consciousness confronts nihilism, which denies that anything exists without an external condition. Jacobi coins this term in 1799, in an open letter to Fichte, to signify the loss of faith in the immediacy of experience, in the fact that the reality of what we perceive and the value of what we do, the true, is manifest without mediation or inference from external conditions. This fact collides with the nihilism of rational science, which abstracts from the true by reflecting endlessly on its conditions. Nihilism ceases to feel its pressure, becoming lost in a game of reflection. Oh, oops, a book by Hans Jonas about George Herbert Mead. Okay. So it was about Hans Jonas. Cool. American sociologist who worked with Dewey. Interesting. What? He is the guy with the hair? Chalmers? Yeah, he had hair. He cut it more recently, though. Yeah. Duel the duelist, I say. Throw down a glove. There we go. Yeah, let's get a fight on. Okay, so nihilism thus disavows our pre-reflective experience of directing and perceiving and acting in the world. Yeah, so it's like nihilism, nothing matters, so you don't have to worry about anything else. Jacobi's reply is that the true gives reasons its value. Faithless reason, numb to the true, lacks purpose. He accordingly appeals to what it is like to perceive and act, stating that perception is marked by a feeling or intimation of the true, and that one feels that one is free and has inner certitude of the reality of one's actions. Yeah, so that's what gives you knowledge, is this feeling of the experience, your subjective experience, and so that matters, but that is cut off from the scientific sort of like how the brain works, that feeling. Thanks for the lurk, Cost. So as he says in his Spinoza letters, quote, I have no conviction more vital than I do what I think. Okay. Jacobi traces nihilism to the ancient nihilo fit, the principle that nothing exists without a condition, and regards Spinoza as its exemplar. For his fidelity to this principle entails that nature is a machine whose parts have infinite causal conditions, and which direct perception and free action are mere illusion. Jacobi must locate the wonder of perception and the unfathomable mystery of freedom outside the mechanism of nature, for nihilism denies that we feel the true in perceiving and acting, that, quote, in our consciousness, reason and freedom are found inseparably connected, end quote. Like physicalism, nihilism collides with the first personal fact of what perception and action are like. Unless this problem is solved, nature's inclusion of conscious experience will remain, as Chalmers warns the physicalist, an unanswered question, and as Jacobi chides the nihilist, completely inexplicable. Yeah, so I guess just like physicalism, it says you don't need any experience, and nihilism, if there's no meaning in the world, why would you feel subjective need to like be connected to things? Energy says, even though I'm not convinced of German idealism yet, other than Kant, because I've read most of the Critique of Pure Reason, I'm interested in learning more about how they apply Kantian insights to argue for new theories of subjectivity. Sure. I mean, the post-Kantian tradition is gargantuan. So it's like, yeah, there's plenty of stuff to read. Some of it you may like, some of it you may hate, but there's plenty of stuff to look into. Brian says, although the fact that there's Hans Jonas and also Hans Joas, who worked on similar topics at the basic same time, I'd like to speak to the manager. Yes. So I thought the nihilist denies meaning, not existence. Well, that's the issue. That's what's going on here, Dojo. In the denial of meaning, how do you actually square that with your subjective experience, which sort of gives you like direct sort of feelings about the world. Your subjective experience seemingly makes things matter to you. And so nihilism, that's what is kind of getting set up here, that nihilism and physicalism are acting in similar ways against your subjective experience, because your subjective experience does inherently have value built into it. Yeah. YOLO, exactly. You think you saw a recent interview where he professes to be a dualist? Interesting. Yeah, I guess Chalmers then has, if it's recent, I guess he's saying that like maybe the subjective consciousness is something different, non-materialistic. Interesting. But I mean, we'd have to go see what he said. Okay. One advantage of Kant's Copernican turn is to dismiss the questions that imposes this hard problem. We need not ask how nature is accompanied by the first-person standpoint, because I think is a form of thinking that must be able to accommodate any cognition of nature. The first person is neither the illusion that Jacobi dreads, nor the absurdity that concerns Chalmers, but a condition of the possibility of cognizable nature. Kant's term for this condition in the Critique of Pure Reason is apperception. And if I know we just shouted him out, but our buddy Luminance Bloom in chat is going over, the Critique of Pure Reason in his stream. So yeah, Nietzsche has entered the chat with YOLO. Exactly. Carpe diem, if you want to be classical about the YOLO, just say carpe diem, and that's much fancier. So yeah, go if you are interested in more Critique of Pure Reason and this post-Kantian tradition, he's the place to be. I'm so starting to think we may never escape it. Yeah, well, such is life. Plenty of streams ahead of you. Doger says, value isn't meaning for me. I'm not a nihilist, but I'm a nihilist adjacent. Okay. I mean, okay. Like, sure. I'm sure there's more than one way to, like, split this up. Okay, so yeah. So the term for Kant's term in the Critique of Pure Reason is apperception, which denotes a self-consciousness that unifies our consciousness of nature qua sum of appearances under a universal and necessary laws, specifically the categories of understanding. If cognizing nature assumes the first person standpoint as its ground, that standpoint poses no hard problem. No view that conflicts with the first person collides with an inexplicable fact, but only collides with itself. Yeah, so it's just saying, look, we have this ability to view the world. That's the precondition for all of our thoughts. And so thinking about yourself at that point, that mistakes what's going on. You're like doubling up the questions, because the fact that we can ask these questions presupposes this structure that we can apperceive the world, that we can conceive of the world. And so, like, you've, in some sense, asking about this subjective experience after the fact is missing the point. Viper says, I keep meaning to get a Carpe Diem tattoo, but I never get around to it. Yeah, exactly. Why would you? Can't, like, you'd have to find some time. What day would that happen? Benny Lemonface, I can't even begin to recover the meaning in the reasoning in this paragraph. Yeah, I mean, this is a gloss on Kant. If you are not a Kantian, then it's just like, well, just let it go. Because you need some background in Kant to be able to understand this sort of perspective. And that's fair. Yeah, someday, exactly. Okay, so QQ, Chalmers is a dualist then. Interesting. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, the reasoning in this paragraph is really just historical. That's all it is, Benny. So, it's a historical gloss on Kant. Now, if you're not Kantian, it's harder. Yeah. Yeah. Alright, Fichte inherits the Kantian insight that a Copernican turn is parallactic. We see that nature depends for its lawful unity on apperception precisely by marking a reorientation in objects that arises from a reorientation toward ourselves. Yeah, so if we are presupposing some structure that gives us understanding of the, the phenomena in the world, it's like, yeah, then when we think about that nature, we are like reflecting on what we already perceived through another viewpoint. Okay, naturalistic dualism. Okay. Yep. Okay, as Kant says in the B preface, just as Copernicus' success in astronomy requires registering a shift in the motion of celestial bodies given our revolving position, success in metaphysics requires registering a shift in the position of empirical objects given our peculiar constitution. Objects a priori spatiotemporality arises when we see that they must conform to our forms of cognition. Yeah, so again, you see something, you see my stream, and then you think about your particular view on the stream, but that's only in reflection. So you've got these, what your experience was, which you get, that's how the world is, and then you have this reflection on it, and that's your sort of second parallactic view, it looks like. In attempt at a new presentation of the Wissenschaftslehre, sorry, my German-speaking friends, Fichte embraces this parallax, pursuing a complete revolution in the way we think, such that the object will be posited and determined by our power of cognition, and not vice versa. Yet Kant's formal conception of apperception worries Fichte in his Novo Methodo lectures. This conception cannot exhaust the grounds of experience, for it does not show why we posit objects at all. For Fichte, it is our agency that first opens a world of objects specifically as ends and obstacles. It is by means of such acting, and moreover only insofar as it is hindered or arrested activity, that we obtain any consciousness whatsoever of what is actual. I guess so this is an empirical point that you actually have to go bump into something in the world, and that's why you understand things. It feels very empirical for a sort of this tradition. So I can't Kant, I'm Abel Hegel, yeah. Lumen says, we were at the same time thinking about how we represented to ourselves that the pronunciation was bad. Thank you. That was lucky then, if the pronunciation wasn't bad. Yeah, so again, you perceive it, but that's the structure of our reality according to Kant. And yeah, again, then we are thinking about how we represent it to ourselves, and that's the sort of the shifting thing. Because that's not the actual perception, that's a reflection, but that's the alternate point of view, these reflections. Okay. The apperceptive eye catches sight of objects because it originally discovers itself as acting among, toward, and away from them. As Fichte says, experience refers to acting. Concepts originate through acting and exist for the sake of acting. Only acting is absolute. End quote. Apperception then is not a form of thinking, but a real activity. Indeed, it is only by affirming the eye's real activity that transcendental idealism can establish the primacy of practical reason contra nihilism. Yeah, so you have to think about, I'm doing something now when I look at shit. And that's the act of the eye, is that you're looking at stuff and you are, focusing on it, you might want to say. Okay, Fichte adapts Kant's idea of apperception in order to refute Spinozism's nihilistic corollary. Whereas Kant holds that the I think is a thinking, not an intuiting, Fichte argues in his Aeneasidemus review that apperception must be realized through intellectual intuition if transcendental idealism is to exhibit the existence and autonomy of the I. As he explains in the new presentation, apperception is an intellectual intuition insofar as it grasps the I as an acting. Fichte addresses his argument to those with a lively zeal for science, that is, for an idealism whose absolute ground is faith in oneself, in one's own self-sufficiency and freedom. He disregards those who, as a result of protracted spiritual servitude, have lost their own selves, yanked back and forth by the secret fury pent up within them. End quote. Theirs is a faithless reason, one enthralled to external conditions, committed to a nihilistic view that contradicts their I-hood. Yeah, again, so if you want to put your foot down here, it looks like Fichte does, saying, look, you viewing stuff, when you say I see, or I do, or I interact, that is the fundamental, recognition that you have some sort of reason at work in perceiving the world. And that's what's giving you these different viewpoints, these different reflections you make. Sock, I can't, to be specific, I can't Kant, I'm able to Hegel, and mark me with the marks. But In what follows, the author continues, I argue that for Fichte, the I poses no hard problem because it collides exclusively with nihilistic views like Spinozism, which are refuted by a properly idealist conception of apperception, according to which the first-person standpoint is the absolute ground of our experience of nature. If idealism refutes nihilism, nature is no more explicable than that there is something it is like for me to perceive and act. In section 1, I show why Kantian apperception is necessary for possible experience. In section 2, I reconstruct Fichte's argument that a modified conception of apperception refutes guises of nihilism, thereby solving the hard problem of consciousness. In section 3, I suggest that transcendental idealism undermines Chalmers' proposed solution to and Daniel Dennett's dismissal of the problem. I'm glad you could find your Nietzsche. Oh, man. Not lurking, more like skulking? Hey, whatever you want to call it. Okay. Section 1. What it is like, for whom it is like. To grasp the necessary apperception for the possible experience, consider two explanatory gaps. An explanatory gap separates scientifically explicable physical facts from directly accessible phenomenal qualities, and that the latter neither are nor follow from what is so explicable. This gap is empirical because it lies between scientific and ordinary experience, between a posteriori encounters with the objectively physical, what it is, and subjectively phenomenal, what it is like. As Chalmers argues, physicalism cannot close this gap. Yeah, and that's the whole point. If anyone has questions about like that question there, that would be like, you have to understand, whatever your experience is, that's not the same things as like electrons. None of us experience electrons, like as electrons. You have experiences, and then we like derive through our physical study that electrons exist. But that's the whole point, is that we are not physically experiencing like an electron. I'm not like seeing the photons hit my eye. I'm seeing stuff, or at least something that isn't photons. If they are at odds, are they? Is naturalism in opposition? We'll see. It depends. This paper is in idealistic philosophy, so I don't think we're going to go with naturalism specifically. Maybe we will, but we'll have to see where we go. Please don't physics. Yeah, I mean, I'm not physicsing, but I mean, I'm metaphysicsing here. Like, do you actually see any photons? I don't even think that question makes sense. Like, you see objects in the world, but your eyes like pick up photons, but like that's not the measure of experience. Like, that's not what your experience is. Like, no one has seen an electron. Like, how could you? That's not what our eyes see. You see the evidence of electrons. QQ is another problem with their phenomenal experience is that we can't point to it in the external world. I see chairs, tables, things in general, but not the experience of a red chair or something like that, so physics can't describe it. Yeah, and this is the issue, is that it can't describe your experience because it's your experience. It's not in the world. Frank says, I don't see objects in the world any more than I see photons. Yeah, but I mean, what do you see then, Frank? Yeah, what do you see? Like, if you don't see objects and you don't see photons, what do you see? Because I take it you can see. Lumen says, agreed. In what sense does a photon exist is a metaphysical question. Yeah, and that's the difficult part. Fidel says, when we imagine an image, are we creating photons? I mean, I don't think we have the ability to, like, ex nihilo create photons. We are definitely doing something in our brain. But, like, yeah, what exactly are we doing? We're not, like, making photons hit our eye. We are, imagining something in our brain, which is going to be changing our brain chemistry. But yeah, exactly what that means is hard. Yep. Okay. A further non-empirical gap separates the phenomenal character of experience from its subjective character, and that experience is involving something it is like, which varies across conscious episodes. Can I explain? It's involving something it is like for me, which abides across conscious episodes, like mine, qua mine, as mine, yeah. Frank says, I see both, or I see neither, or you admit you mean differently things by see for them. Well, like, if you were to look around wherever you are, because I know you're at work sometimes while we're streaming, like, do you have, like, a computer or something that you are looking at? Like, what do you see the computer, like, bezel around my stream? Like, the monitor? Like, I don't... the body registers photons, like the eye registers photons. I'm not denying that, but my experience is not of my eye registering photons, because, if you didn't know what photons were, you would never be like, oh, that's the experience. Like, the experience is of seeing stuff in the world, usually. Yeah. Because, it's the question. Consci's pixels, yeah, fair. Okay, so this gap is non-empirical because it lies between experiential states and an experiential standpoint between episodes in a heap and their belonging to a unity, my perspective. Whereas particular experiences have phenomenal character, what it is like. The whole of experience has subjective character, what it is like, for whom it is like. As Kant shows, only a transcendental idealist conception of apperception can close this gap. Frank says, so you're looking for seeing photons that you have defined as not existing. I didn't say photons don't exist. Of course photons exist. I'm not denying the physics. I'm denying that, say before we knew photons existed, how would you describe experience? You wouldn't call it photons. You might call it something else. But it's like, you weren't being like, oh, I see all these little dots of light coming in and then I put that together and describe things I see with the dots of light. No, you see things in the world. You don't describe putting together dots of light or qualia or what have you. I'm saying the word see cannot apply to photons. Well, I don't think it actually can, because we need to use the photons to see. So you're not actually ever looking at the photons. But I mean, you could use electrons for that matter at this point, because we can't see electrons directly either. Is grass green or do we make grass green? Yes, Fidel. Consci's horny people? I mean, are you like the sixth sense of horny people? Yeah. Okay. So in the A deduction, Kant says, quote, consciousness of oneself in accordance with the determinations of our state in internal perception is merely empirical, forever variable. It can provide no standing or abiding self in the stream of inner appearances and is customarily called inner sense or empirical apperception. That which should necessarily be represented as numerically identical could not be thought of as such through empirical data. There must be a condition that precedes all experience and makes the latter itself possible, which should make such a transcendental supposition valid. You infer the existence of horny people. Okay, Dojo. Yeah. This passage shows why an account of experience that fixates on the empirical gap rises to the level of empirical apperception, the inner sense of determinations of our state, and why this is insufficient. As a consciousness of oneself, inner sense exhibits the phenomenal character that collides with physicalism and nihilism. And so this is what it's saying. It's like, look, if you were looking at the atoms, you wouldn't know how to put the rest of it together, And so it's like you need something that actually unifies stuff, because if you were looking at all the dots of light, how would you know how to group them together? Frank says it is illegitimate to define C in such a way that we can't see photons. Then exclaim, wow, physicalism fails because we can't see photons. I didn't say physicalism failed because we can't see photons. And that's not what was claimed here either, I don't think. Don't use photons, use electrons, because photons are weird because they're used in the process of sight. So if you just say, look, we don't see electrons, that's not what we see. We can see the evidence of electrons, say we have you shoot an electron through one of those gas chambers, and you can see the electron going through, and that's fine. But that's not what's going on, even though I know electrons make up all the stuff I'm looking at right now. There's infinite, near infinite number of electrons. I know that's in this computer monitor with a webcam on it. That's fine. But yeah, it's I don't see the electrons specifically. I see my webcam, I see my monitor, I see chat. Viper says, we perceive through useful stereotypes. It is useful for you to watch Twitch. You watch streams. If you're a monitor repair engineer, you see the pixels. Yeah, but again, these are all things that you can actually see with your naked eye. Where nobody actually sees electrons with your eye. It's now, yeah, you can use microscopes and stuff like that. And I can get close enough to the screen to actually go see a pixel. But the experience point here is that we're not seeing the things that are actually making up the screen or whatever else it is. K-Power says one electron here, another electron here. Electrons exist. Hooray! Viper says, so there are no top-down platonic ideals, only bottom-up stereotypes. Well, okay. I mean, I can understand that point of view. I'm just saying, and then especially in the case of this paper, I don't think that's the Kantian view. The Kantian view says, look, to actually have like a stereotype, as you're putting it, is to, perceive like my computer monitor and webcam I'm looking at right now. That's what you see. And the way you do that is through this apperception. And you can call it a bottom-up stereotype if you want, which is fine. I'm sure Kant wouldn't be okay with like your terminology. It's like no big deal. But it's like, how do you actually put this together? Luhmann says, even an electron microscope only observes evidence of electrons, not the electron directly. Yeah. Naive realism is a monkey on your back. I mean, for me or for Kant? I mean, the whole point of this experience talk is the naive realism. Like, I'm not the bad guy here. Like, not me. This is like, what is the experience? I'm trying to narrow this down so we actually are on a sort of like similar page with what the author and like, the hard problem of consciousness is. You don't have to say these things exist. You can say it's all like, in our heads. Fine. But that's the point, is that this in our head thing doesn't seem to line up with experience. And I know y'all are in like Ivan's chat and you say, okay, you take away all the things our brains are doing and there's nothing left. Fine. But the whole point is that you have that one thing at the beginning. What is that? Viper says, through the stereotype garnered through experience, watching a stream is a different experience for people who have and haven't streamed themselves. Yes, but I take it the people who haven't watched a stream aren't confusing my stream for the pixels or the pixels for the stream. That's exactly what's happening here. You're missing the forest for the trees. Or someone who hasn't watched stream before being like, oh, look at all those pixels on screen, and then they don't notice I'm streaming. Like, that's the problem. They would see the stream. They wouldn't notice the same things you, as like someone who's been on Twitch in a stream before, notice. But like, they're not going to be like, I don't understand what's going on, because like they don't see it. It's like, what was it? The cats or something, their eyes see differently than us, and so they wouldn't really understand what old TVs were doing because it didn't look the same to cats as it does to us. But now with a better frame rate, I think cats can watch TV like we can watch, and now there's like cat TV shows with like birds and stuff, and they like it. And so it's like another human wouldn't be there and be like, what are you looking at? They would at least see some of what you see. Is in our heads existing? Yeah, sure. Viper says, I'm saying we see what's useful to us. That's fair too. But then the question then becomes, what are the conditions for what's useful to us? And that's what Kant is talking about here. Ooh, chat. Yes, chat is cool. Okay. Yeah, so this inner sense of determinations. How do you actually determine what you're seeing? Viper's saying, well, it's useful, and that's fair, but like, this is the question. How is it useful? Okay, and so Kant is saying, and this is insufficient on its own. You need something that actually presupposes, like, allows you to make these sorts of judgments about what is useful, what is good, the determinations of our state. Why it's insufficient to just be like, whatever. Okay, as consciousness of oneself, inner sense exhibits this phenomenal character that collides with physicalism and nihilism. But yeah, so we have a way to put things that are useful together in the world. Physicalism doesn't give that to us, and nihilism doesn't give that to us. Either of those two. But since empirical data are contingent, the content of our inner sense is forever variable. It yields nothing necessary, so no abiding self whose identity can unify the stream of our inner appearances. By itself, then, empirical apperception is blind to its own condition. This condition, Kant says, is a transcendental presupposition, and just before this passage he says it is nothing other than transcendental apperception. Hence, we must turn from the empirical gap between physicality and phenomenality to the non-empirical gap between phenomenality and subjectivity. That is, an account of experience must rise to the level of transcendental apperception. Crucially, this indicates that the hard problem of consciousness ultimately requires filling the transcendental gap. Luhmann says, especially because my conscious inner sense organizes the representations in time. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about the temporal thing, but that makes sense too. It's like, how does your brain put everything together in a way that makes sense? You need a condition that says, well, that's what the brain does. Because like you can always assume it does that, but you're always changing. How does it actually do that? Well, there needs to be a structure of something. That's what the brain is doing in time, is keeping things unified. Okay. Kant elucidates transcendental apperception in section 16 of the B deduction. Quote, the I think must be able to accompany all my representations, for otherwise something would be represented in me that could not be thought at all, which is as much as to say that the representation would either be impossible or else at least would be nothing for me. I call the I think pure apperception in order to distinguish it from the empirical one. I also call its unity, unity, the transcendental unity of self-consciousness in order to designate the possibility of a priori cognition from it. For the manifold representations that are given in a certain intuition would not altogether be my representations if they did not altogether belong to a self-consciousness, that is, as my representations, even if I am not conscious of them as such. They must yet necessarily be in accord with the condition under which alone they can stand together in a universal self-consciousness, because otherwise they would not throughout belong to me. Yeah, so you have to be like, these are the things that are useful to my consciousness. That's what my brain's doing. Lumen says, yep, exactly. I know I'm looking at, for example, a table because time allows me to see it as a stable object persisting across time. Yeah, we have hard disagree. Fair. Hard. Yeah, hard problem, hard disagree. Sock says you also need your thoughts organized because then your ideas will not make sense. Yeah, I'm using that on purpose now, Vipers. I adopted your terminology. But that's right. It's like, yeah. I mean, even if, I don't know if you were pointing it out in the text, but like, yeah, I agree that's a good word to be using here. Okay. Empirical apperception by itself is a phenomenal flow with no abiding self, dispersed and without relation to the subject's identity. Since empirical data are contingent and their condition of unity differs in kind, it must be transcendental. Yeah, because remember, wherever you are, whatever you're looking at, that's going to be, you're not the same person you were a few minutes ago, a few days ago, a few whatevers ago. So it's always going to be different. You're always going to be changing. You can't be like, this is the same table as before, because you're not the same person and that's not the same table. It's the old Heraclitus quote. You can't step into the same river twice. Okay. Kant describes transcendental unity, a universal self-consciousness in which I can regard determinations of my state as mine. Whereas inner sense arises a posteriori, self-consciousness precedes representations as the a priori condition of their unity, the lawful structure of which unity is provided by the categories. Hence, Kant calls transcendental apperception the supreme principle of cognition, without which I would have as multicolored, diverse a self as I have representations of which I am conscious. End quote. Since inner sense affords merely a contingent unity of phenomenal consciousness, it cannot be mistaken for transcendental apperception. Yeah, so you could think of all your, like, say, qualia and how you're like sensing them, but the way that you can put that whole scene together, that's a transcendental apperception. But you can have lots of different colors or perceptions in your experience, but the idea that it all comes together, that's a transcendental apperception, that you are cognizing that scene or whatever that is, that experience. The relevant gap for an account of experience is thus non-empirical. Experiences involving a what it is like cannot explain involving a for whom it is like. That is, phenomenal consciousness cannot explain its own unity. We fill this gap if we see that consciousness presupposes self-consciousness as its transcendental condition. Yeah, you have to be having that scene in order to put all the stuff in the scene together. As Kant says, quote, only because I ascribe all perceptions to one consciousness of original apperception can I say of all perceptions that I am conscious of them, end quote. Physicalism and nihilism may leave conscious experience unexplained, but we cannot simply combine our outer sense of physical objects and inner sense of determinations of our state. This would yield a heap of episodes lacking the lawful unity of a self-conscious perspective, which is why the hard problem ultimately confronts us with the transcendental gap. A representation is, quote, nothing for us, unquote, unless it can belong to the standing and lasting I, which is the transcendental ground of lawfulness and all appearances, that is, of the formal unity of nature. You like Kant, but I disagree with Kant. I dislike Kant and I disagree with Kant. I do not like him. He was like his ethics are scummy and it leads to a lot of scummy shit. And I also think he's wrong. I mean, yeah, like I'm pretty anti-Kantian on a lot of things. So yeah. Yeah, go to the Hegelian side. I don't know if you want to lose your mind like that, but like, maybe you do. If there's something it is like to perceive and act in nature, it is something for us. It belongs to the first person standpoint of transcendental apperception, which functions to unify nature under laws. This standpoint poses a hard problem only for views that nihilistically evade the fact of phenomenality or inadequately explain the fact by halting at the level of empirical apperception. This is to say that the I poses no hard problem for any truly comprehensive view. Consciousness presupposes self-consciousness. Fuck. Really? Okay. It looks like I might be back. I think refresh. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, Dojo says, it only dropped for a second or something. Doger says, I think that we see photons, we perceive the world around us in ways that helped us survive as human animals. We assign meaning in similar ways, but why perseverate on the difference between what we experience and what is? Kant has an ulterior motive. Yes, hello, Vipers. I don't think Kant has an ulterior motive, Dojo. I mean, you may disagree with him, but I think he's actually pretty straightforward in what he's saying if you dig down to what he actually is saying. There's no reason for him to have like some hidden thing here. It would be such a pain in the ass. Now, granted, you may disagree with this whole project. You may be like, he's just like, doing a rationalistic Christian like male thing, and like he's just trying to give a philosophical account of that. That's like, yeah, sure, maybe. But like, so what? Yeah. You are hack. Yes, hack. But like, yeah. But yeah, I don't know where I lost you guys, but I'll go back a little bit. Yeah. But like the whole thing is like, the idea is that like if you didn't have a unified ability, an eye that unified your like general scene for you, then how would you put stuff together? You'd have to put your stuff together in a way that was disjointed, and there'd be no, if there's no I there, well, how would you, there would be no you, there'd be no I to put it together. It would just be sort of like, different sorts of like TVs going that aren't related to each other. It is bullshit though, yes, but that's fair. I mean, I'm not dropping frames anymore, so I mean, it may just be, yeah, I don't know. But anyway. Like, it doesn't say, it's bad, so yeah. Viper says, brain damage or feral children not acquiring language because they missed the window, prove him wrong. His science is bad. His science is hundreds of years old. Yes. That doesn't mean that but you see, there's a disconnect there between the language acquisition and the perception. We're talking about perception here. And so, like, yes, his science is bad. His categories are wrong. They do not work. The question is, what does it work in this one case when it comes to conscious experience? Maybe, you might think, and that's what this author is arguing for. Yeah, it's not a psychological argument. It's a general structure of understanding. How do you put a scene together in your head? You need it to be unified, that it is your experience. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, like I was just saying, you've got multiple TVs going, multiple streams going, and they're not relating to each other. And so it's like, how would you put them together? You couldn't. The streams don't go together. QQ says it can be experienced by natural selection. People who don't have the connection between different events are connected only by time shift won't survive. Yes, you can do the natural selection thing, QQ, but that's the whole point, is that it, like Kant would agree. He'd say, yes, you have this as a structure of rationality, and if you didn't have it, you'd die. You wouldn't be human. Empirical apperception is more consistent with observation, because it would be. You become a Humean skeptic, yes. Frank says, the I is me too. The entire filtering and abbreviation process from a trillion inputs, decision point is me. It is bizarre to think I should have a way to track an intractable number of inputs. But that's the point. That's not your experience. You can define your experience in that way, but our experience isn't one of those of an intractable number of inputs. Like if you were experiencing an intractable number of inputs, you wouldn't be able to do it. And that's kind of the point, is that that's not what's happening here. It's something else. Yeah. And what Luminance says, obviously you do it, but that's not what's at stake. At stake is the experience where you seemingly know some things. That's all. I am experiencing them. Well, so how do you put together all those trillions of things? Because that's not what these folks mean by experience. Because that's not what they mean by experience. You are doing that, but that's not like, what do you mean by experience? That is kind of like what your body is physically processing, but do you actually experience, how do you actually experience a trillion things? Like, how do you even think about that? I can't think of a trillion objects. I just can't. You have to throw away all the information that react to it in a way. That's exactly what brains do. That is what brains do. Is that what your conscious experience is like, though? Your conscious experience is not throwing away information, is it? Are you thinking, I'm going to filter out 99% of what I see? Like, do you actually think about that? Like, is that what you are thinking about? Like, oh, I have to get rid of all of this stuff to, like, pay attention to stream. Or you just pay attention to stream. You don't experience this is what your body's experience is crazy talk. Is it? Like, Frank, do you experience millions of things in the sense of that's what you're consciously experiencing? That's what you think about. Are you thinking about the trillion things? That's what's at a question here. I'm not saying what your body does. I know that's what your body does. The question is, what do you actually think about? This is getting close to Huxley's mind at large. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's a bunch of ideas in this area, Vipers. Yeah, Luminance says you have a gestalt of something as an X object, not a blue patch here now. Yeah, that's the question is, do you consciously think about a trillion things? And I mean consciously, like when you're talking. Because you don't talk like you're actually filtering out a million things. You're giving me a unified sentence that has like a meaning to it. That's one thing. Are you thinking about that and 4 trillion other things at the same time? I don't think so. Maybe you are. But like, it'd be very different from my experience. Okay. So again, where I think I got caught off was over here. This standpoint poses a hard problem only for views that nihilistically evade the fact of phenomenality or inadequately explain that fact by halting at the level of empirical apperception. And that's exactly what you guys are saying. Like, I have this empirical thing that's happening and I'm understanding all of it. And they're saying that's not what we're talking about here. This is to say that the I poses no hard problem for any truly comprehensive view. Consciousness presupposes self-consciousness. The idea is that to actually talk about your experience is to say that there is an I there experiencing it. Frank says, I am nothing about each of the trillion things because I am mechanisms that summarize those things into something simple enough that I can do something. Yeah. And that's the issue. It's the can do something experience that's being discussed here. Consciousness is not talking about all the same things your body's experiencing. Yeah. Viper says Huxley saw the mind as reducing value to filter out the maddening truth of reality, whereas drugs could open the valve and see. God damn it. Fucking hell. Yeah, this is really annoying. I'm sorry. Like this, I hit the 2 hour mark and it's like stream is like acting up on me. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, I'm sorry about that, folks. Annoying as hell to me. But the whole thing is that you don't want to be using experience in two different ways. What the body is experiencing and then your consciousness is like sort of actually engaging with. And that's about it. So you've got conscious engagement and then physical experience, and they're not the same thing. And that's kind of the distinction here. Yeah. Okay. A manifold of, let me just get through this fucking thing. I'm like not even halfway. I'm about halfway, I think. Where am I? I'm on page 5. Jeez, I have to go faster. Okay, I only have to get to page 10. So I'm about halfway. Or a little less. A little more. Viper says, is by will alone that I set my stream in motion. Is by the juice of Sappho that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stains, the stains become a warning. It is by will alone that I set my stream in motion. Frank says, you're demanding that those experiencing are two different things is assuming dualism from the start. I don't think so. Because I don't think about a trillion things. Like when I'm thinking about stuff, I'm like, how many fingers am I holding up on my hand? 5. 5 fingers. I'm thinking about the 5 fingers. I'm not thinking about the trillion things. Like the conscious. All right, I think we're back, but like I'm gonna try to get reading again because this is driving me a little crazy. I'm sorry, folks. Like I had a good week and nothing broke, and now this week everything's breaking again. I don't get it. Yeah. Okay. QQ, you don't want to be asking how Kant explains medical stuff. It was a long time ago. It doesn't really, it's not going to make sense. I may be wrong, but I think Kant's conclusions are awfully convenient for his religious views. Dojo, that is exactly one of the criticisms of Kant. It's that all of his conclusions seem to line up perfectly with his religious upbringing. Okay, let me try to read some at least. Okay, a manifold of representations is only mine if it can belong to the thoroughgoing identity of apperception, if Kant says I can combine it in one consciousness, an act of spontaneity. Yet apperception for Kant is a simple representation in which nothing manifold is given, a form of thinking whose manifold depends on sensation. For Jacobi, apperception annihilates perception of the true insofar it adds the object to a sensory manifold by combining the latter in consciousness, as he says in David Hume on Faith. Kant thus seems to indulge a nihilistic game of reflecting on mediating external conditions, here subjective rather than causal. For Fichte, however, we refute nihilism if we regard apperception as an immediate consciousness or intellectual intuition of the eye's real spontaneity. I will now reconstruct Fichte's refutation and show how it solves the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah, so again, if you have this thing that's conscious experience, what are we doing? Well, it's the structure by which we perceive reality. That's what it is here. So it's different. Yeah. I think the issue here is that, Frank, what you mean by monitor is what they mean by experience. You are monitoring something. I think that's what the difference here is. Yeah. So I was like, whatever you are considering by monitor, you're homunculus, if it were. Okay. The primacy of practical reason. In section 6 of the second introduction to the new presentation, Fichte announces the gist of his philosophy. Reason is absolutely self-sufficient. It follows that everything reason is must have its foundation within reason itself. In short, the Wissenschaftslehre is transcendental idealism. Although the letter of Kant's idealism leaves the apperception I dependent on sensibility for a manifold, its spirit seeks to show that the experience is absolutely grounded on reason, or the pure I. Fichte's textual support for transcendental idealism identity with the Wissenschaftslehre is Kant's claim in section 16 that the apperception is the supreme principle of cognition. Fichte describes apperception as consciousness that is the, quote, the same in all consciousness, not determinate by anything contingent within consciousness determined by nothing but itself, and determined absolutely, end quote. We saw that for Kant, since contingent inner states yield no I, the latter must determine itself spontaneously. Fichte now adds that the I must determine itself absolutely on pain of dogmatism. For his term for nihilistic views like Spinozism, for which everything that occurs within consciousness is a product of a thing in itself, including consciousness, allegedly produced by freedom. Unless the I absolutely determines itself, unless its spontaneity unconditionally grounds experience, dogmatism is possibly true. The letter of Kant's idealism tolerates this possibility by restricting the I to a form of thinking dependent on sensibility. Yeah, so it's like you need something, you need like the spark of free will to actually give unity to the world, and that can just be whatever that fundamental thing is. It really should not depend on reality the way we perceive reality. I mean, we're affected by it, but the spark of will, as it were, in Fichte here, looks like it's really that you need a completely free spark. Otherwise, you're just going to be determined by nature or whatever. Oh, there's a smooth continuity of homunculi. That's cool. Yeah, all right. We talking back and forth. Aha. I didn't know you were like a amalgamation of homunculi, Frank, but that's interesting. If consciousness is a mere product, as Jacobi fears, spontaneity is illusory. I mean, and I bet like everyone in chat actually thinks that's true. That spontaneity is illusory and it's a mere product. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if all of chat was like, no, this is the correct thing. But like, you know, you can see that they're fighting this, but that's the whole point. Okay. We would then deny subjectivity and the phenomenality that it conditions, trading the for whom it is like and what it is like of experience for the what it is of existence. But we avoid this nihilistic result if we prove that the apperceptive spontaneity grounds consciousness. In the foundations of entire Wissenschaftslehre, Fichte says that this proof requires positing the I as a first principle, positing its activity as a ground from which to derive the forms of cognition, including sensibility. He charges that Kant points to this activity but proves no derivation, clarifying by his charge in the new presentation. If, as Kant holds, consciousness is conditioned by the I, its content arises outside the I, limiting if conforming to the latter. But if consciousness is determined by the I, its content is derivable from the I's spontaneity alone. This content includes the forms of sensibility on which the I would not be dependent. Only by showing that practical reason is, in this sense, the source of the theoretical, can an idealist consistently affirm the former's primacy. But how precisely can idealism prove the primacy of practical reason? Again, the spark of whatever it is what's, giving meaning to all the perceptions that you get in. How do you unify and understand them? I mean, no chat would be like, well, it's evolutionarily determined and other determined, but this is, again, idealism. You need a theory of this. Spontaneity also basically means free will in the Fichte context. Good to know. Thank you. Viper says, our vocabulary and schema for understanding these phenomena are, and I believe this is the technical term, kind of fucky. I think that's accurate. Jin Ghost, what's up? Consciousness isn't a substance, is the capacity for awareness. I think you would fit in right well with this crowd here that we're reading. This is sort of an idealistic version, and they're talking about the preconditions for awareness. So that would be a capacity. So we're talking about that stuff. Jin, welcome in. Okay. Fichte credits Kant with directing our gaze away from objects towards ourselves, a parallactic turn he identifies with the spirit of idealism. As he says in section 1 of the first introduction, philosophy's first demand is to look within oneself, as this alone draws attention to the system of representations that are accompanied by a feeling of necessity and the question of its basis. Since Fichte's synonym for this system is experience, whether inner or outer, it follows that it includes inner sense of phenomenal states and outer sense of physical facts, and that the question of its basic concerns the apperceptive eye. Since the eye must determine itself absolutely on pain of dogmatism, it follows, moreover, that this question specifically concerns the apperceptive eye's unconditional spontaneity, that is the primacy of practical reason. Fichte proves the latter by contrasting two responses to philosophy's first demand. Y'all are talking back and forth. Okay. Just as the condition of empirical apperception differs from it in kind, the basis or first principle of experience is non-empirical. A dogmatist posits as its principle the thing in itself, while an idealist posits the I. Like Jacobi, Fichte identifies consistent dogmatism with Spinozism, which nihilistically renders the I an accident of the not I, a product of mechanical nature. Idealism instead views the not I as a way of looking at the I, a limitation of its activity. A dogmatist requires the not I to ground our representations. The latter must be effects in a system of conditions to preserve nature's causal closure. Yeah, so if like what you're thinking, everything's out in the world, that's the not I, and that's what's like, doing all the physical stuff. The physical world is doing all the physical stuff. From these people's point of view, to make sense of the world, you need the freedom and the spark of creativity or whatever it is to then unify this in a conceptual scheme. He wants his anime back? Yeah. I mean, you got to remember, a lot of anime is just riffing on philosophy, so sure. And I don't know who Mamoru Oshii is. I'm sorry. I am uncultured. Okay. Fichte replies in section 6 of the first introduction that no one, not even a dogmatist, can, quote, deny the testimony of immediate consciousness, which everyone who has taken a hard look within themselves must long since have discovered, end quote, specifically that the I is an immediate unity of being and seeing. And this is exactly what I mean. This is what, when they're talking about this I, they're talking about the actual monitoring that you're talking about, the actual experience of the unity of what's going on, not all the filtering, but like the whatever that thing is that puts it all together, not the cutting stuff out. It's the cutting out all the nonsense and putting it together in a way that makes sense to you. So that's the I and the immediate unity of being and seeing. Oh, Ghost in the Shell. Well, in that case, I love that man or woman, whoever. I love fucking Ghost in the Shell. Yeah, he wants his anime back. This is why I love Ghost in the fucking Shell. Sorry, I don't. Names are not my best. Yeah. Sorry, Vipers. I'm losing it. The I is not simply conscious of objects of possible experience, but is conscious of this consciousness that is self-conscious. An object exists for the apperceptive I. In this sense, its being is conditioned by my seeing it. To ask for whom an object exists then is to invoke the I as a unity of or double series of being and seeing. Yeah, so again, you already had to put everything together to recognize there was anything in your perception that you could talk about, and then you're like, well, who's that for? Well, that mistakes the fucking... that puts the cart before the horse, or Descartes before the horse, because you have to have already understood the scene correctly, the whole unity, to then identify any singular object within that unity to understand that as singular that you could talk about. And then that's the double seeing, because you saw it once as an apperception and then you're seeing it twice as this identification within your already unified scene. Descartes before the horse. Yeah, that's an old joke there, Illuminants, but not that there's two kinds of experience. Yeah. There's only one kind of experience, and then there's reflection. Okay. Fichte indicates why dogmatism's nihilistic corollary raises the hard problem that confronts physicalism. Dogmatism neglects the ideal series of apperceptive seeing, limiting its inquiry to the real series of objective being in which each member is the effect of another's lying outside it. This series yields nothing that exists for itself, specifically nothing that observes itself, the apperceptive eye. Yeah, if everything's just a causal chain from outside in, then where's the unity of your experience? Okay, that was to Frank. Okay, no problem. It therefore cannot explain consciousness, for it excludes the latter's condition. And I'm sure all of y'all would be like, no, that's what biology does. Yes, I know that. But you can see in this theory, if it's just all these external forces, there is no unifying factor here. Okay. As we saw, the hard problem of consciousness ultimately confronts the transcendental gap and is solved only if we rise beyond empirical apperception to transcendental apperception. A what it is cannot explain what it is like precisely because it cannot explain for whom it is like. Dogmatism's limited inquiry generates the hard problem by tracing causal conditions in a real series that lacks the transcendental condition of an ideal series. Hence, Fichte infers that dogmatism cannot transition from being to seeing. Indeed, he says, in all the various guises in which it appears, dogmatism leaves an enormous gap between being and seeing. As a guise of dogmatism, physicalism leaves the same transcendental gap because physicality's inability to explain phenomenality is essentially its inability to explain subjectivity. I mean, I know y'all are screaming that like this is just like begging the question here. I can hear that in my own head too. But again, keep this in mind. If you want to explain the unity of the experience that we have, then that's the question at hand. Now, maybe you're saying there is no unity, and then you can like deny all of this. But if you say there is a unity to experience, what is doing that work? Luhmann says if you don't have some way of organizing into unities, then you have no reason to not be a Humean who says no one really exists. They're just bundles of perception. Bite the bullet if you want, but you have to do that if you want to say it's just biology. Yeah, and I think we're probably just on the same picture of what's going on in this paper here. Okay, dogmatists and physicalists cannot rise above empirical apperception. As Fichte says, many people have simply not progressed in their own thinking past the point of being able to grasp the single series constituted by the mechanism of nature. For such people, a representation becomes a particular sort of thing. As we saw, mere empirical apperception is blind to its own condition, specifically the spontaneity of combining representation into one consciousness. Only transcendental apperception closes the gap between what it is like and for whom it is like of experience. It is the self-sufficiency and spiritual freedom by which idealism can prove the primacy of practical reason and refute dogmatism. Viper says you're assuming the division between internal and external. To use Ivan's terminology, we are part of the waveform. Yeah, and that's another way of you're saying, look, you need the internal eye. I mean, they've been harping on the eye the whole paper. That's exactly what the eye is. The eye is like this internal consciousness. And yeah, if you're going to deny there is an internal, then that's also going to say, well, they're begging the question that there is an internal. Sure. Okay. Nevertheless, theoretical reasoning cannot settle the dispute between idealism and dogmatism. Quote, neither of these two systems can directly refute the opposing one, for the dispute between them is a dispute concerning the first principle, that is, concerning a principle that cannot be derived from any higher principle. If the first principle of either system is conceded, then it is able to refute the first principle of the other. Each denies everything included within the opposite system. They do not have a single point in common on the basis of which they might be able to achieve mutual understanding and be united with one another. Even when they appear to be in agreement concerning the words of some proposition, they understand these same words to mean two different things. I wonder who is that quote from. Doger says, hand waving frantically. So what is providing the unity? Something mysterious, something? Some mysterious something. That is exactly right, Dojo. It is very mysterious. That's the spark I was talking about. That's the conscious eye. That is what is unifying your experience. It is very mysterious. But that also is the condition on what, Like, you don't have to be as mysterious about it. You can say, this is what evolution has given us. It has given us a way to do this. Now, we can't quite explain it at the moment, but like, yeah, that's how evolution works, is giving us this thing. And that would be the condition to unify our experience in a rational way. Luminant says Kant had a minimal I that was just the name for the structure, features of experience, but Fichte took further to make more contentful and active. Yeah, and that was Fichte. We were talking about that earlier. Fichte criticized Kant because it could still be forced into doing things from like the external world, and your consciousness doesn't, in some sense, like, yeah, you can look at stuff and you see stuff, but the idea that you're unifying it is not part of the external world. So the question is, how does that happen as a reaction to the external world? And Fichte's like, no, you can't do that. You have to have something like purely I that does the unification. Okay, a clash of first principles is theoretically insoluble. First, each is a derivational ground and so underivable. Second, each supports rigorous, thoroughgoing explanation, producing a system as plausible as its contrary. Third, each renders a contrary system incoherent, lacking common ground with the same and yielding a stalemate. As Fichte elsewhere explains, quote, every philosophy presupposes something that it does not demonstrate, on the basis of which it explains and demonstrates everything else, end quote. A dogmatist can, by, quote, a correct inference, end quote, from her principles, discredit the alleged fact of spontaneity as an illusion, thereby colliding with no hard problem. And one is unable to refute a dogmatist by positing the I's spontaneity, since her principle entails spontaneity's incoherence. Caitlin Balog identifies the same theoretical insolubility between physicalism and anti-physicalism. Each side can unseat the other side core assumptions if they are permitted to make their own core assumption. The anti-physicalist appeals to the anti-physicalist principles. The physicalist appeals to the conceivability of a purely physical world with phenomenality. Both can show that once granted that one core assumption, their view is consistent and can rebut challenges from the other side. Neither side can, without begging the question against their opponent, show that the other's position is untenable. Okay. You guys are replying to each other, yeah. Positing subjectivity as the principle on which phenomenality depends begs the question against the physicalist, for whom there is neither the empirical nor the transcendental gap whose closure requires subjectivity. She is free to posit physicality as her first principle, produce a consistent, complete system, and talk past her disputant. But then her core assumption, like her disputants, is a bare assurance. The dispute must therefore be resolved practically. For an idealist, this requires grasping the primacy of practical reason, specifically by grasping one's apperceptive spontaneity. One cannot be compelled to do so. Fichte says, quote, self-consciousness does not impose itself upon anyone, and it does not simply occur without any assistance from us. One must actually act in a free manner, end quote. The primacy of practical reason must therefore be proven first personally. Likewise, denying its primacy must be refuted first personally. Its denial must be self-refuting. Hence, although Fichte cannot refute the dogmatist with theoretical reasoning, he can show that she practically refutes herself. I don't know if I agree with that Fichte or author here. I don't know who's making this claim. I mean, I can appeal to chat, as I have been, that there's a, subjective experience, and chat has been disagreeing with that bit. So the idea that you can say that chat is self-refuting is not fair to chat, I think. So I'm not sure that this is going to hold up, like this whole thing. Are people who are arguing for just the empirical stuff, like practically refuting themselves? Because what I call freedom, they're just calling, natural reactions, biologically mediated natural reactions. And that doesn't seem crazy. Okay, positing a first principle in response to philosophy's first demand is done. Fichte says by means of a free act of thinking. Yeah, so you have to go demonstrate it to yourself that you have a free act of thinking. Now, how would you ever know what a free act of thinking was? Can't you just be fooled by thinking your act is free when it is not? I mean, I grant all this. Dojo hates this paper. It's sloppy. It lacks careful arguments. Seems to have straw men everywhere. It's not in your tradition, I think, Dojo. I am not in this tradition either, but it's not talking about stuff that like an analytic or a scientific person would want. I know some of you are philosophical positions just because you've been around, and so it's like I know that it's not going to be agreeing with a bunch of that stuff. It being in another tradition is not inherently bad, but I think it's adhering at least somewhat to the standards in this Kantian tradition. It's talking about Kant, it's talking about Fichte, it's talking about their positions. It's not talking about anything else. Yeah, it's navel gazing for people who work in German idealism. And that's fine. It's a paper in German idealism, and no one else needs to like take their word for it. But I mean, that's what it is. Okay. So yeah, Fichte says by a means of a free act of thinking. Like if you can swallow free act of thinking, you might be a German idealist. A Viper says, let's face it, if quantum mechanics was a thing in Kant's time, he would have slapped quantum onto a bunch of ideas. I'm sure he would have, but like, you know, because like he loved like his Newtonian theories of space. Like he was completely happy with that. Okay. Yeah, so if you get your free act of thinking, and this is because a response is normative, I hold myself as responsible for it and regard it as correct. Yeah, so if you think you have a free act of thinking and it's yours, like you're already a German idealist maybe. Like you might be an idealist. You can't know about quantum mechanics without a heart attack. Probably. Doga says you can't state X is absurd without exploring a bit more and then never justify the position. Again, in this area, there's like background reasons why it's absurd. And believe me, this is written a few years ago. This author knows all of modern stuff. Like they're not living in a cave. It's like this is a modernly published thing. This author knows all, like, or at least is aware of modern physics. Like they just are. There's no way G. Anthony Bruno is not aware of modern reality. They are writing in this tradition, and it's okay. I mean, I don't want to like be defending the article if it's got things wrong. I will defend it on its own grounds in terms of German idealism. Like this is fine, I think, in terms of writing about German idealism for other German idealists. Okay. All right. So yeah, you hold yourself as responsible for it and regard it as correct because that's your thought. You think it. A dogmatist's inner self agrees in this respect with her disputant. Her capacity to posit a principle is inescapably normative and thus spontaneous. As Fichte puts it, quote, a philosophical system is not a lifeless household item, but is animated by the very soul of the person who adopts it. Yeah, so the soul, spark of freedom, whatever this is. No response, then, is compatible with the dogmatist's nihilistic corollary. Positing the not I is accordingly a performative contradiction, since its corollary precludes its possibility. In placing my response in the real series of mechanical nature, I belie it qua response. I refute myself. As Fichte infers, a dogmatist's denial of the primacy of practical reason is her antidote to her own position, her cure. Luminant says he is mostly rehearsing arguments from Fichte, which he assumes the audience will know, but yeah, it does make it go a bit too quickly, maybe. At least that's your read on. Yeah, I feel like this is running through the Fichte. This is not actually a very long article, so it is. Doga says, I will fully admit when something is not for me, but it just comes off as hyperbolic to its detriment. Fair. You know, fair. Like, even Luminance is saying it's going quick. So, it's like, yeah. Okay. In the paralogisms, Kant says that if we abstract from the I, we turn in a constant circle, since we must always already avail ourselves of the representation of it at all times. Fichte agrees in the Foundations, stating that a dogmatist positing the not I must think unawares of the absolute subject as well as contemplating this substrate. and so must unwittingly subjoin in the thought the very thing from which they have allegedly abstracted and contradicted themselves. But Fichte denies Kant's claim that the apperception merely thinks the I, arguing that it must intellectually intuit the I if we are to prove the primacy of practical reason. Fichte clarifies that intellectual intuition does not grasp a being, which Kant prohibits, but rather an acting, and this is something that Kant does not even mention, except perhaps under the name pure apperception. Not one fart joke. I know, it's very disappointing, Cost. What are you going to do? Of course, when Kant mentions apperception, he means a mere representation. For Fichte, however, the I spontaneity must, on pain of dogmatism, be intuitably real. Intellectual intuition is accordingly the immediate awareness of the I's reality. He apprehends the I do that must be able to accompany my representations, the acting that grounds the encountered objects of this acting, the primacy of practical reasons. Yeah, again, you're doing all the stuff. You are putting everything together. That's the I that's important here. You don't understand anything about this paper? Well, again, not a German idealist. Yeah, okay. You have to, I can't explain all of German idealism in a few words. But you do have to realize that you're talking about, okay, you see stuff. There are conditions on you seeing stuff. Is it biologically mediated? Is it metaphysically mediated? What is going on there if you assume there's some sort of mediation? And this is discussing the kind of mediation you have to have a conscious experience. That's all it is. Okay. Proving this primacy is first personal. I discover that I am active and cannot be driven from this position. Fichte invokes Jacobi against complaints that this discovery is indemonstrable. Jacobi's rhetorical point in charging that nihilism leaves perception and action inexplicable is that it offers third personal explanations, whereas the true is not explicable by external conditions. Intellectual intuition of spontaneity is indemonstrable because it is unconditioned, attained not through transition, but by means of a leap. Nihilistic views refute themselves by resisting this leap. Like dogmatism, physicalism fails to rise to the apperceptive standpoint that closes the transcendental, hence also the empirical gap. If we want to avoid nihilism and any hard problem that confronts its various guises, we must, Fichte says, elevate ourselves. Okay. Transcendental realism's waiver. Consciousness poses a genuine problem for Fichte, one that is insoluble absent a practical stand. An idealist takes this stand by demonstrating that subjectivity collides with no comprehensive view because it conditions any views being comprehensive. I conclude by briefly suggesting that transcendental idealism undermines Chalmers and Dennett's responses to the hard problem. You know, this is very ambitious given what they were saying earlier about having to take a leap to understand the thing. If someone is going to put their foot down and say, I don't believe in this subjective experience thing, this is just how I do. And as some people were saying, it's I just experience stuff and I move forward. That's it. It's okay. And you're not going to make any grand claim about the eyes and the the eye and how it unifies everything. What's this author going to do? Lumen says, I say this paper is just summarizing Fichte without adding a lot thus far, but I assume the intervention will be saying how Fichte's argument clarifies the philosophy of mind debate. Maybe. Okay. Yeah, I don't know enough Fichte to say anything about this. In terms of that, is it just not adding anything new? I mean, all they have is this page. There's one page left for them to make the whole fucking point then. It's a little annoying if you're going to put it all the way at the end. A transcendental realist treats appearances as things in themselves lying beyond our sensibility. In the paralogisms, Kant argues that since her representations nevertheless rely on sensibility, they are insufficient to make their reality certain. We can never be fully certain of reality from any possible experience, and so she plays the empirical idealist. Hence, her position wavers between casting reality beyond her standpoint and acknowledging features of that standpoint from which she cannot infer that reality. By contrast, a transcendental idealist treats appearances as representations and so need not doubt their reality. They exist on the immediate testimony of her self-consciousness. She is thus an empirical realist, for she grants appearances a reality which need not be inferred. She achieves a stable position unlike her wavering counterpart. Dennett's response to the hard problem exhibits a transcendental realist's waver. In Quining Qualia, he acknowledges such a problem's nihilistic threat by observing that many insist on qualia, on experience involving a what it is like, as a bulwark against creeping mechanism. However, on the assumption of a third-person objective science, he argues that qualia cannot exist because their inversion is neither introspectively detectable nor intersubjectively comparable. In A History of Qualia, he explicitly infers the dissolution of the hard problem from qualia's non-existence. If consciousness is a user illusion as real as El Dorado, there is no empirical gap, but only physical facts. Yet Dennett cannot infer such or any facts from within his own user illusion. As a transcendental realist, he cannot cognize reality on the basis of representations that he himself discredits. Hence, he plays the empirical idealist. So I guess he's saying here that, this person's saying here that, look, even if you take all your sense stuff, how do you actually unify that into any unified consciousness? How do you actually talk about this stuff? You can't do it because it's all just sort of like broken up and you've got all these empirical sort of nihilistic things that are impinging upon you, but you can't unify them because there's no I there. And that's why it's just empirical idealist, but that doesn't work because you're just taking empirical stuff and it does not unify it. Okay, Chalmers fares no better. Affirming qualia contra Dennett, he supplements physical principles with psychophysical principles, raising consciousness from explanandum to an explanans in order to render perception and action explicable. But expanding one's metaphysical principles does not entail a principled metaphysics. That requires proof of our right to the concepts on which such principles rest. In the deduction, Kant observes concepts that, quote, circulate with almost universal indulgence, but that are occasionally called upon to establish their claim by the question, quid juris, and then there is not a little embarrassment about their deduction because one can adduce no clear legal ground for an entitlement to their use, either from experience or from reason, end quote. A transcendental deduction proves our right to the categories as concepts that universally and necessarily condition the possibility of experience. As Chalmers offers no such deduction, his principles risk the embarrassment of conceptual grounds, which we lack right, the fate of a transcendental realist disregard for experiential conditions. Worse yet, he says that his principles need only appeal to, quote, non-empirical constraints such as simplicity and homogeny, end quote. But these are constraints to which physicalism can equally appeal, mere theoretical concerns that we saw guarantee an insoluble dispute. Worse still, raising consciousness to a principle presupposes self-consciousness as its supreme principle. Given the nature of the disputed datum, what it is like for me to perceive and move through the world, a practical stand is needed. According to Fichte, transcendental idealism serves this end by inviting us to view the concept of apperceptive activity as primary and that of being derivative. This involves the parallax of shifting from a world that poses a hard problem of consciousness to one whose problems are primarily familiarly practical. Such is the resolve necessary for overcoming the various guises of nihilism. Hooray! I made it, and the stream didn't fail a third time. Or did it fail already 3 times? But anyway. Shit. There we go. Anyway. Now we review the paper. If you're new here or if you're not, remember we've got a whole bunch of emotes. Spam the emotes. They're better TTV emotes. They're available to everybody. If you thought this was fun and gave you some fun ideas, give it a brain dance. Spelling and capitalization do count here. If you thought this talked about some existential or artistic drama, give it a Nog Scream. Ouroboros for deep arranged ideas. Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. Nog Navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Rapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch and my vote meh. Note, I calculate an overall score. The score goes up if it's in the emotes in the green, it goes down the red, and the vote meh makes it go to the middle. Philosophy got hands, yeah. A lot of hands. Okay, a little bit of grapes actually, but still kind of liked it. I figured luminance. It was not the worst, but not the best. And this stuff is like, you have to like the transcendental philosophies. Yeah. You didn't vote. I didn't understand anything. That's fine. Like, thank you for being here, QQ. I mean, you don't have to, like, not all philosophies for everybody. Energy liked it, so we got a brain dance, a scream, an Ouroboros, a knife, and a yay. Lumens also gives it a brain dance, a scream, an Ouroboros, navel gazing, 2 yays, and some grapes. Vipers gave it a brain dance, a scream, 2 navel gazings, 2 turds, 3 grapes, and a nay. Cost gave it a grapes and a nay. Sock gave it a turd and a meh. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a little bit polarizing because it was so far into the Fichte and the Kant that if you are unfamiliar with this kind of philosophy, it's going to be outside your realm. Now, I tried as best as I could to, like, you know, be like, well, what is the unifying factor? Which is not a crazy question to ask, but it's hard. Yeah. Frank says, I think it was probably mostly good, but unpleasant because it didn't prophetically answer the question I would ask of it. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Big data? Is this? Yeah, I wonder what I have to think of what I'm gonna say. Actually, I can't change screen at the moment because when the screen's up, that's the only time I record your emotes. So yeah, but like if that's a meme then. Is consciousness illusion? But data isn't illusion a state of consciousness? I'm a philosopher. Look at my big beautiful beard. Exactly. Give me that beard action. So yeah, what am I gonna say? I mean, this had like one, like this just like this really leaned into the Fichte. I don't know the Fichte, so it was kind of fun for me to like, you know, do that. I'm gonna go with a, you know, I guess we'll go in Oro, but we're gonna do a lot of navel gazing on this. So we're going to start off with that. I'll think about maybe throwing some more stuff because it did hit some big points in Kant and Fichte, and it did attempt to, you know, apply this to contemporary stuff. They had this sort of like, I have to kind of, now that I think about it, I think Vipers is right. Because what they did was at the end they said, well, you know, people have insoluble disagreements, but then if you put our foot down and be like, well, there's no way they can explain what we said without that leap. It's like, well, dude, you kind of walked it back right at the end, didn't you? And they said, well, you have to insist upon it with that leap. I'm like, yeah, do you really? But you know what the fun thing is? I think this was a good paper. It's going to get a vote yay out of me. Like, if you were interested in this stuff, fine by me. Lumen says, but I agree that it's closer to a much better way of thinking about consciousness than either Dennett or Chalmers. Yes, but you're fucking in this area already. You kind of like to write paper like this, but not quite how I would do it. Yeah. I mean, you are already on this idealistic side of stuff. So, I mean, you're not going to impress anyone here with that a post-Kantian viewpoint, Lumens. Yeah. Vipers, he just criticized the empirical approach without saying how the transcendental approach resolves the problem he finds other than wave his hand and changes the subject. I mean, that is what they do. They say, look, you have to have this metaphysical argument, which you can be like, that's hand waving. Fair. But it's like, yeah, in that area, this is a legit move. And so it's like, yeah, it's hand waving from one side. It's a legit move from the other side. And that we're back to just like arguing past each other.